Just a warning, this episode contains discussions of sexual assault, PTSD, and the depiction of graphic content. Some of these themes may be triggering, so listener discretion is advised.
And I think that's just beginning when I was about 7, 8 years old that set the foundation for eventually moving forward and somehow being manipulated by these guys. Then that would be the beginning, and then they would traffic us. This was not a natural act for us. It was a survival act, and we were felt dirty and disgusted and ashamed.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Bound by the Cloak. Today we have the conclusion of Greg Bucceroni's story. If you haven't listened to part 1, you really should, or else you'll be completely lost with this one. So go check out episode 3 before you go any further.
So let's get right to it.
I'm going to tell the truth. That I've been lying about it to myself for years, decades, and this is the time to put it all out. And if people don't like it, tough shit.
When you were younger, and you said you were raised by just your mother, for the most part, right? Single parent household. I guess I just wonder, where was your mother? What was she doing in terms of you were put into these programs, but was she working? Was she just sort of not around?
No, my mom was pretty much working 2 jobs.
Okay.
She was, because keep in mind, we didn't have a lot of time. She had a lot of bills. She was stressed because, my mom, was stuck with all these children, and we were rotten kids. I mean, we were pain in the asses, and for different reasons. and my mom was like, she had to pay bills, and she was struggling, and this is not the life she wanted. She got married, and the marriage didn't work for whatever reason. I don't want to start bringing up family things, because then I'll get family calling me up saying, why are you telling that stuff? But let's just say my mom did not have an easy life, and she really struggled to make the best of it. And she had a lot on her plate. And so she kind of let my older siblings try to babysit us. But, they had their issues too. And I manipulated all that. So my mom has a lot of regrets, and she's, she didn't know, she knew I was getting in trouble, but she didn't realize to what level. Because I wasn't telling her, and my siblings didn't know everything. They didn't know I was out there turning tricks and all this other stuff. My family did not know. And then when I told them, they were in shock. And then there were certain factions of the family that said, that's disgusting. You shouldn't talk about it. Just man up and move on. And you got your family's reputation, and you're going to be an embarrassment to the family. And then there was others that supported me. So there was, there was that. But my mom, she did the best she could, but, she was overwhelmed. She was struggling to put food on the table, and she didn't make a lot of money, and she was probably mentally and physically beat by raising all these rotten kids at the end of the day with very little help.
Yeah.
I give, I'm not going to say anything else about my family because I don't want to start a family feud.
Oh, no, I totally understand.
Yeah. I guess one last question I have is, so say there's a young Greg Bucceroni, a young boy who was in your situation. What would you tell someone like him?
Well, I've dealt with these. We just had a case that just got successfully prosecuted in Philadelphia by District Attorney Larry Krasner. And there was 2 young street boys that were involved in victims of sexual abuse and trafficking. And similar circumstances, believe it or not, because I've been very outspoken on social media and in person. I do these talks and these workshops about it, because now I took the women organized against rape, took the blame off of my shoulders and put it to where it needs to be, meaning failed youth programs where they should have been, the red flags were there, law enforcement, accountability with law enforcement. So these two kids, I won't say their names, but back in 2019, the mom reached out to me and said that her two children, one just turned 18, one turned 19, but for years, they just got arrested for beating up and allegedly robbing a guy that had been sexually abusing them for years. But the guy called up in similar circumstances. There was some type of disagreement and allegations that they beat him up and robbed him, and he didn't know them, and they were locked up. So the mom called me, and I talked to the mom, and I said, if they're willing to sit down with me and talk and cooperate, I can get the district attorney's office to handle this case. Philadelphia Special Victims was a waste of time because any boy that's in and out of trouble, they don't see them as victims, especially if it's children of color. And these two young men who happen to be black. So, and they're not credible. So I went to special victims. I got to run around again. I do not trust special victims or the internal affairs of the Philadelphia Police Department. I don't trust a lot of cops because a lot of cops, even the good cops, aren't going to jeopardize their jobs for the bad cops. Because if it goes wrong, you got that thin blue line of silence, and cops don't tell cops because then your career could, you'll be, instead of part of a team, you'll be an individual. And so I've never really, I want to trust cops, and I do trust certain cops, but there's a lot of cops I don't trust because, especially anything to do with special victims or internal affairs, because they won't. So I got these two young boys. They kept blaming the district attorney for not handling it. I didn't believe it in 2019. So I would not let it go. And I reached out to the DA here. He knew nothing about it. So I convinced the district attorney's office to take the case away from the Philadelphia Police Department and allow their own detectives, district attorney detectives, to handle the case. And they did. And I convinced these two boys to, instead of being criminals, now they're victims. And then the truth came out. They cooperated, and the charges were dropped against them. And this guy, it was a 2-year back and forth in court. COVID-19 did not help, but the guy finally pled guilty. He pled guilty. He's going to go to sentencing, and apparently he's facing 10 to 20 years.
Wow.
So there was young boys. But what I got to do is I got to talk to them, because boys are going to put up that, oh, I'm a boy, ain't no guy doing this, I'll knock them motherfucker out. Like, they come with this straight tough slang, and I used to be that. But once you break those barriers and you get to see the real person and they trust you, they got to trust you. If they don't trust you, they won't tell you anything. And it takes time because it's not the manly thing to talk about. Keep in mind, society is based on men by a lot of Neanderthal mentality. So like when girls in college and they had a few drinks and these guys decide they want to gangbang them, oh, that's the manly thing to do. I mean, to these knucklehead Neanderthals. Oh, yeah, bang, yeah, she's a whore. And then when she comes out and says this, oh, you deserved it. Look how you were dressed. And, that's just the mentality. I'm not saying all men, but the common. So I work to break these barriers. And then when I gain the trust and they start telling you a little bit, I wanted them to trust me and to come forward and have the courage. And it's not easy. And it goes by, each circumstances and who the kid is. And, there's a lot that plays into that. But I've talked to them. And the first thing I do is I tell them my story.
Yeah.
So then they say, this guy's street tough guy, it can happen to him, then I don't, I'm not gay because if this happened to you, not everyone, but a lot of people in society will think you're gay, and that you're gay, you just don't know you're gay, and so that's the stigma you got to fight. But once we get past all this stuff, we start talking. It takes time, but they start talking, and then I try to get them to cooperate with law enforcement to move forward to get justice. Some of them, even after they talk, they still don't want to involve law enforcement because they're trying to avoid the future trauma, emotional trauma.
Yeah.
But I work on them. At least if I can get them to get therapy so that they don't go out and start doing more drugs or crime or alcohol or domestic violence. And as they move forward in life, at least that helps. If they don't want to get the police involved, at least get therapy. And then we try to set them up with that.
Yeah. I mean, your work is so important. And, what you're doing is really changing people's perceptions about a lot of different things. Young men from, various backgrounds. And also that really sexual assault and sexual abuse can happen to anyone at any time. Doesn't matter where you're from, right? It's it's a weird like epidemic that way. It just crosses borders.
And we've had some celebrities come out. Sugar Ray Leonard came out and said that he was sexually raped as a child. Mike Tyson.
Yep.
Who would think that anyone could rape Mike Tyson? He said when he was a kid running the streets, some guy grabbed him and raped him.
Yeah.
I mean, that takes a lot of courage for Sugar Ray Leonard and Mike Tyson, especially Mike Tyson.
Yeah.
Like, they're like, what? And, so now it's starting to show that it's not a gay thing. It's a tragic thing that happens, but it happens to men and boys too.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think public awareness and education is the key.
So, yeah,
Of course, advocating for victims and survivors. Those three things are the key to waking up society.
Yeah. I mean, thank you for all that you're doing and also talking about your story because it's definitely not easy. And
If
that.
if you would have asked me to talk about this 15 years ago, I would have denied everything because I wasn't ready to talk and I was ashamed and I blamed myself. But after years of therapy, we have to see. I'm an activist. Everyone says, "How come the other ones don't do it?" Because they're survivors, but they're not activists.
Right.
So they're not going to talk about it because that's not what they do. I'm an activist. This is my redemption. Just like when you see people come out and support the Black Lives Matter movement or any movement, whether what side you're on, they're doing it because this is their passion. And this is my passion. And I've lied about it all my life. It's time to start telling the truth. And that's why I publicly do it. And everyone says, we're doing it for money. I don't ask for nothing. I don't want anything. I just want to go, when I go to meet God, I want him to know that I truly changed my life and tried to help others. This way I could die in peace. Everyone's going to die eventually. I know that I died doing the best that I could. And I didn't do it I didn't sue Penn State. I didn't ask anyone for money or anything like that. I do it for redemption.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And anytime you guys want to interview, I know I cover a lot of ground and it kind of goes back and forth. But it's not an easy thing to talk about. But I do want to educate the world on, how real this really is every day. And that there's children right now, as we're speaking, boys and girls, that are being sized up and being groomed and coerced into a life of victimization.
How prevalent do you think it is right now?
Well, you got the Super Bowl coming. That's a big money thing where people come in and anytime you have big sporting events or Super Bowls or around politics, big time politics, or it's very prevalent. But what happens is no one's investigating the boys. You do hear a lot about the girls, and I'm very proud that that's starting to happen. But you seldom hear about boys because the men survivors aren't as outspoken as I am because they're not activists. They're survivors, and they're trying to move forward in life, and they feel they can't heal if they keep reliving the trauma. So they try to get past it and move forward. But with me, I'm the activist and I'm pushing public awareness, advocacy, and education. So I have to keep this alive and keep pushing it because history repeats itself as we see in the Jeffrey Epstein case.
Yeah.
And look at all the people that lied and discredited those poor girls. Netflix did a documentary on those girls. I don't know if you guys saw it. Hey, they
I didn't see
hired
that one.
people that you should take a look at what they did. They had anyone that tried to help those girls were harassed and terrorized and bullied and discredited. The girls were made to be discredited, lies, and it's very hard for a victim to come forward under these circumstances. It's because then no one believes you, and it makes it even worse. And we got to keep this alive, and we need more activists to come out publicly, not just once while it's news media, but it's everything you do in life moving forward to save. I can't save the children from the past because I can't change the past. But what happens today moving forward, I can't change that. And that's what I'm doing with the help of partners like yourselves.
Yeah. And I hope 10 years from now, we have less victims and we have more people talking about it.
What's great about it is that people are being held accountable criminally and civilly. So it's a wake-up call to America. If you're running institutions that are exploiting children, not only are you going to get locked up, but the institution that enabled it after the red flags, you're going to be held accountable civilly.
Right.
And people now, these institutions, if you look at any major institution, red flags were everywhere. But no one wanted to deal with it because it's an uneasy thing to do, and the integrity of the academic or these facilities and people's social light statuses and all this crap. So people just pretend like they turn their head and pretend like they didn't know it. And then if anyone questions, did you know? They do. There was a Sergeant Schultz on Hogan's Hero. I know nothing. I don't know if you guys ever saw that TV show. It was a sitcom called Hogan's Heroes. But then they play stupid, and they do the Three Monkeys. But you know what? That don't work anymore. Now, if you enabled it by not reporting it and stopping it the best you could, now you're going to be held accountable civilly. And we want that, not only the offenders, we want the offenders held accountable criminally, but anybody that enabled them, especially institutions, we want them held accountable. We can't get them criminally, hit them in the pockets, because that's what hurts them most.
Greg, thank you so much for sharing your story. I think the work you're doing is amazing and really, really needed.
Thank you, guys. We're partners in this together. Victims' lives matter.
They do. We want to thank Greg for sharing his story of resilience. We also wanted to learn more about sexual assault, the prevalence of it, and where survivors can go if they needed help. We reached out to WOAR not to verify Greg's story, but to learn more about sexual assault and the services that WOAR provides. They clearly stated that they cannot confirm or deny if they provided services to Greg, but they did give us a lot of information about the variety of services that sexual assault programs provide to survivors on a holistic level. We spoke with Rachel Copen, the co-executive director of WOAR.
To all of our volunteers and staff that go through sexual assault counselor training, it teaches people how to respond to survivors, but it also meets a really important confidentiality criteria for the state of Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania has a law in place for survivors of sexual violence that if they engage support from a sexual assault counselor, anything that they share with that counselor is considered privilege. So it's covered under the statute of absolute privilege. So going through that training, And there's it's technically 45 hours. There's a 5-hour like practicum portion to it. But to complete that training and then work with a survivor, whatever that survivor discloses to a sexual assault counselor is protected. And it's actually, many people, when they think of confidentiality, when they're thinking of HIPAA, the state law is actually stronger than HIPAA. So it's a very strong confidentiality. And that was something that was put into place, that victim advocates and lawyer advocates put into place back in the late 70s, that then became part of law, so that at that time there was a lot of what was being said in that relationship with a counselor was being poked at on stand to try to discredit the survivor. And it was, as one can imagine, very harmful and traumatic. So through that advocacy, it then created this protection. So there is a very strong protection of confidentiality, and very similar to some people that work in domestic violence. It's a very similar confidentiality that domestic violence counselors share.
Thanks so much, Rachel, for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Sure. So if you could introduce yourself, if you could introduce WOAR.
So I'm Rachel Copen. I'm the Director of Counseling Services at WOAR Philadelphia Center Against Sexual Violence, formerly known as WOAR Women Organized Against Rape. I am also, as of May 2021, the Acting Co-Executive Director of WOAR. And WOAR is a rape crisis center in Philadelphia. It's the only rape crisis center in Philadelphia, and we serve Philadelphians that are survivors of sexual violence, and that includes sexual harassment, sexual assault, and sexual abuse.
Could you give us a description of what sexual assault and sexual abuse is?
When we talk about sexual violence, sexual assault, sexual abuse, or sexual harassment, we're talking about any kind of sexual contact that has gone against someone's wishes, consent, or has happened underneath fraud, coercion, or force.
Well, sexual assault has been in the news a lot lately, and it's very much focused on women, but also male victims have come out to talk about sexual assault and sexual abuse. So just curious about how it affects women differently than men, if it does.
Sexual violence is non-discriminatory, so it affects across all genders, all races, ethnicities, all diversity. It affects people. There are vulnerable populations that tend to have a higher rate of sexual violence, and one of those populations are the LGBTQ population. They tend to, unfortunately, face higher instances of sexual violence and really deserve to be protected and safe. So I think you asked, how is sexual violence different from men and women? So women tend to be a little bit more at risk for sexual violence than men, though when men and women or males and females are children, you'll see there's like an equal percentage of sexual violence occurrences that happen. And then as women and men become women and men, sexual violence tends to happen more towards women than towards men. I think the data that is available is very robust, but it's also thought of as one of the most underreported crimes or underreported instances of what happens. So you can really only go with what people share. And I share that because it's possible that men do face sexual violence at a rate that is more closely comparable to women, but are not sharing it as much because of societal pressures and shame and feelings of guilt that men sometimes have that is a little bit different than what women will face. Though women also do have their unfortunate fair share of shame and guilt around sexual violence as well.
So in terms of the work that you do at WOAR, could you tell me the breadth of the services? Because my understanding is sexual assault can affect a survivor in many different ways, and the services differ from each individual survivor.
We have our direct service department, and I think of that department as 4 different subgroups. So we have what we refer to as victim response services. So we have a 24-hour hotline for the city of Philadelphia for sexual violence. So if someone is experiencing sexual violence, if it's something that had just happened or something that's happened 20 years ago and they're now thinking about it or struggling with it, it doesn't matter if it was recent. They can call us and we'll walk them through support and then also options. Some people want to report, some people don't, and we really respect either decision and try to help people through that decision process of what happens in a reporting process and what would be the potential outcomes of not reporting, of reporting. So we really are respectful in the choice of that survivor. So that's one of the things we do in the hotline. We also, again, I mentioned support. So a lot of times we might be providing like crisis support or emotional support in a moment and help people through what's kind of referred to as trauma response symptoms, and not only explaining like this is very normal to have a trauma response symptom, this is what it feels like when you've experienced trauma, but also here's some tools to help mitigate those effects in this moment right now. And let's figure out how we can help you learn to manage these symptoms on a longer term basis. So that's what happens on our hotline. We also do something called medical accompaniment. And so in medical accompaniment is where a victim advocate, upon the request of survivor, will go out and be present during a rape kit exam by a SANE nurse. So SANE nurse is someone that has specialized training, very extensive training in being able to provide a forensic rape exam to a survivor. And so if a survivor wants that added support, we'll go out and be present. And we're very fortunate to have a really close relationship with our SANE nurses in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is a little unique as a county. In the state of Pennsylvania, we are, I think, the only county that handles sexual assaults in the way that we do. Instead of going to a hospital to get a rape kit done, we have a center called PSARC. It stands for the Philadelphia Sexual Assault Response Center. And that's where kits can be done. So SANE nurses are dispatched out to that center. And the unique thing about that center, it's in a co-located space with special victims unit. So if someone wants to report to the police, they can in that same matter of hours, where before it would be maybe even a matter of days to, get a kit done at a hospital, then go to the police. It could be a very long process. And so it's become a shorter, more efficient process. And keep in mind, people can get a kit done and not report to the police. That's something that a lot of people don't realize they can do. And there are other things that happen with a kit. People can get preventative medication for STDs, for HIV, they can get preventative medication for pregnancy if they need that. And that's all free of charge. So the kit and the medication is all free of charge. So those are the things that can happen at PSARC. And our role there, other than working really closely with the SANE nurses, is to make sure that the survivors' voices are being heard in that moment. There's a lot happening, and there's a lot happening at a time where one can be emotionally flooded just from the experience they've had. So we just make sure that they're being heard, that they can take in the information as much as they can, and that as much as their basic emotional needs are being met and physical needs are being met, making sure that they have water, have snacks. PSARC and the SANE nurses are very good at that too. We are very lucky to have a really great group of SANE nurses that serve Philadelphia. And so that's kind of what medical accompaniment looks like. And then one of the other services that we provide under victim response is called court accompaniment. So unfortunately, not all cases are picked up for trial or go to the way towards a preliminary hearing. But if they are, we have a close relationship with our DA's office that contracts us to be in all preliminary hearings for sexual violence. So we're present as victim court advocates in the courtroom for sexual violence that serves adults and children. So we will help support that family. So what that looks like is survivors will really be facing their perpetrator possibly for that first time since the experience. And it can be a very terrifying experience. It can be very anxiety producing to just be in a courtroom. There's a lot of authority figures there. There's a judge, there's police officers around, there's DAs. And there's also people in the audience that are supporting the other cases that happen to be there for the day. So it can be a very anxiety-ridden, unusual experience. So to have a victim advocate there to kind of guide that person on, this is what this day could look like. This is what I am here for. I'm here to remind you that there's somebody here that's a support that you can look towards. a lot of times people have their family there, but sometimes their family is also so overwhelmed emotionally that they can't always provide the same support that someone that's outside of that situation can. And so we're also there to support the family members as well. So we're saying the same things to them and helping navigate them through that process. And because we work really closely with the DA's office, they welcome our presence and us to be there to help keep that survivor as calm as could be imaginable in a very stressful situation for a survivor to be in. And I do want to have a disclaimer that our court advocates are not legally trained in any way. So we're not providing any kind of legal assistance or legal guidance. We're really just providing the support that a sexual assault counselor would support in the legal process. So those are our victim response services. And we have a couple of other, I mentioned before, we have these subgroups. And so one of our other main subgroups that we have are clinicians. So we have especially trained trauma therapists that provide very specific trauma-focused therapy to clients to help them process their sexual violence experience. So if someone has been assaulted, they could have received support from us by a crisis advocate during a forensic interview exam. They could have then also gotten our support through court accompaniment, and they could also be in therapy with us in trauma therapy. So there's a couple of different trauma therapies we provide, and we recognize that trauma affects people in many, many different ways, and we feel it's important that we have lots of different ways to help people through their trauma. So even though we are aligned to a few evidence-based practices, we welcome other promising practices like somatic care or art expression or healing or journaling or things like that. So we follow protocols for prolonged exposure. We also more recently have added on eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, or EMDR. And for children, we use something called trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. And a few of our other therapists have training in cognitive processing therapy, which our clients really like. And some of our clients really like something called TANT, or trauma art narrative therapy. So because our specialization is so specific, we are a really good place to process trauma, but we know that when people come to see us, they need a lot more than just trauma processing. So we work with a lot of other agencies to help provide them the care that they deserve for the other needs that they have coming in. And so we do our best work when we can work within a treatment team. And so we will see people for therapy for somewhat shorter term in comparison to like longer kinds of therapy. So we'll see people for up to about 2 years or so. And we don't like limit sessions, but our care tends to kind of be completed within that time frame. And then the last service we provide is a very newer service for us. A couple of years ago, we started a small trafficking team, an anti-trafficking team. And so we do some anti-trafficking work for sex trafficking. So we have a therapist that's received some specialized training in helping survivors of sex trafficking heal, and receive that training from the GEMS Institute, which is a really wonderful institute in New York that is survivor-led, and they do a lot of training on best care. And Polaris, who runs the National Anti-Trafficking Hotline, they also recommend EMDR as a standard of care for survivors. So we have that training as well to provide that therapy. And we also have in that team a manager of anti-trafficking that does a lot of coordination and care and education and prevention services. We also have an education and outreach team. It's a different department that has really specific focus on raising bystander intervention awareness so that people can learn how to recognize if someone's in danger of sexual violence and the safest way that they could intervene. We have something called Safe Bars, where it's actually something that started in DC, and we were fortunate enough to be able to bring it to Philadelphia, where bars that are interested in learning how to keep their patrons safe from sexual violence can go through our training that becomes a certification to become a safe bar, and then they learn how to safely intervene to help protect people from instances of sexual violence in a safe way for them and their staff. So that's one example. We have a healthy masculinity initiative. So we help kind of raise awareness on rape culture and different ways to have healthy masculinity, and what that even means versus toxic masculinity. And we do quite a bit of we have another thing to highlight is we have something called the Lotus program, where we specifically mentioned in the very beginning of our talking that LGBTQIA+ tend to have higher rates of sexual violence and really deserve to be safe. So we have a specific LGBTQ educator that will go out and teach about prevention to agencies to help raise that awareness so that they can be aware of when they are serving people, what could they be seeing. And they're a wonderful educator. We're very lucky to have them.
That sounds like Philadelphia does a good job with these programs, awareness and education outreach and support for victims.
I think so.
I don't know about other places, but it seems like, you guys really do make a huge effort. I've heard of the Safe Bars thing, and I've only known of it in Philadelphia and DC.
That program is really special, and it focuses a lot on what bystander intervention can look like in that space in a safe way. I think a lot of people want to keep people around them safe in their community, but they might not always know how to do that. And it's a really great program that teaches people how to do that. And I think the unique thing about it is once a bar goes through that, or bar or restaurant goes through that process, they can market themselves that way. They can be certified and it does help people that maybe they are more fearful of going out and enjoying themselves. It helped them select where they might feel safer to go. And so that's, I think, a really great part of that program. Our educator, she's our advocacy coordinator. Her name is Lakeisha Anthony, and she does a lot of that. She does that training, and it's really a unique program.
So back to the support that you offer for survivors. I'm just wondering, obviously, like you said, some people choose to report the sexual assault and some people do not. What would be a reason that somebody would not report the sexual assault versus somebody who does report?
There's a lot of reasons why people don't report, and we hold the framework that a survivor knows they're the expert in themselves and in their life. So when someone doesn't report, it's usually because they are thinking through potential consequences in their own life, meaning sometimes people don't report because they are fearful of retaliation from either that person or that person's family. Sometimes people don't report because they are not feeling safe with the police and they do not want to be involved with police or with the court system in general. And sometimes people don't report because they might not have the energy to go through that process. It can be a re-traumatizing process to go through, and our role in that process is to try to reduce that re-traumatizing potential. But it's really hard to have to go and make a statement and sign it and then be interviewed and have to basically tell your story over and over again after it's just happened. So we really value why people don't report and understand that they're making the decision that they feel is best for them in that situation in their life. So there's a lot of statistics on why people report or don't report. And on RAIN, the national website, they have some wonderful statistics. There are some statistics that I'll be looking at today from NSBRC and Polaris. And RAIN also has some wonderful statistics. They have a beautiful outline of all the reasons why people don't report.
In your years of doing this work, I'm curious as to what is the most common thought or opinion that people who are not from this field, people who are not really, or people who don't really know so much about the facts and statistics about sexual assault have?
I'm placing myself in the situation where I'm meeting somebody for the first time and they learn what I do and their reaction, right? Because at this point, many people in my life, they're experts as well, because, just our own awareness and sharing that. But I think, when I meet somebody for the first time and they ask what I do, a lot of times people only think it's something that affects women. I think that, I sometimes wonder if they're thinking, what kind of woman? Is it, are they thinking of race and ethnicity? And, it's not just the women that sometimes are more likely to be seen in media as survivors of sexual violence. It's all women across gender, across race and ethnicity. It's not just cisgendered women. And then the second thing that comes up is people will then ask, oh, that's so hard. How do you do that work? And so it's kind of like a twofold of just like only thinking of one particular kind of person that's affected, and then how tragic that is. And not to minimize the trauma that someone goes through, but when we do this work, we're kind of unified, the people that do this work, of how beautiful the healing process is for people, and really become inspired by the strength that we see in our clients and in our survivors and their resiliency. And that is one of the most rewarding things about doing this work, and just seeing how amazing people are after going through things that are to some are unimaginable.
You mentioned before trauma response symptoms, and I was just wondering if you could elaborate on what those symptoms might be, what they might look like.
Traumatic stress symptoms are symptoms that survivors of trauma can have that sometimes are very scary and perplexing to survivors, because they might have this feeling of like, what's going on with me? I don't know what this is. But in actuality, it's very expected for people to have the reactions that they have when they've been through a traumatic experience. It's I hate to say the word normal, and I've already said it before, but it is normal to have a reaction. So traumatic stress can look like anything from like fear responses. So think about when you are watching a scary movie and you can feel your breath shortening or your pulse racing a little bit. You might start to sweat. Sometimes people can have like stomach issues, or it might just feel like jumpy. So you might kind of startle more easily. Those are kind of examples of your autonomic system, your nervous system kind of like kicking in and reacting to a stressful, scary situation. And those are like great things to happen. Your body needs to respond in the way that it does. I think when it becomes problematic and what is kind of referred to as traumatic stress is when that's like continuing to happen on an ongoing basis, and there's no foreseen reason why you should be feeling that fear response. Usually what's happening is there's something in one's environment that's triggering, but they just aren't sure exactly or haven't been able to pinpoint what that is yet. And so when something becomes kind of more than just a startle or fear response, it's when you have like prolonged, it can actually affect lots of different things. It can affect the way you think about the world. It can affect the way your thoughts just form. You might have more like fearful or negative thoughts of your daily life than you may have in the past. It can change the way you just view the world. Instead of it being kind of either a safe or neutral place, it might be a scary and dangerous place. And it can also really affect on a long-term basis your general physical health, your overall physical health. So traumatic stress can produce like chronic fatigue. It can produce other kinds of like chronic illnesses in a person, and it can also affect people's mood. So people can either be very anxious, or sometimes anxiety looks like anger and irritability. So they might be lashing out at others and not know why. And then it can kind of start chipping away at supports and interpersonal relationships. And so that's kind of like normal traumatic stress responses that then need to be looked at for different ways to heal from, so that you can prevent these longer term things that can come up.
So rape culture and sexual assault has changed dramatically, in the past few decades. So love to hear your thoughts, how has it changed? And are we in an okay space right now, or do you think we still need to do better?
I think we're in a better space, and I think we can always do better. So we can continue to do better. I've been doing this work for, I don't know, almost 20 years at this point. And what I've seen from the Me Too movement has been amazing. Just to see that the way that Toronto Burke has been able to take this and have it become a dinner conversation. And I don't mean to make that sound like that's amazing to me. This is not something that people feel comfortable talking about in general. And to have it be like, people know what Me Too means now. Like if they know what it was referring to have that become this, to just be part of the public discourse is amazing. And to know that it is, survivor run is also equally amazing. And I didn't see anything like that 20 years ago. And I feel like when spoke out and I'm a big fan. So when I watch her strides that she makes on social media, not just social media, but that's how I engage her work. I've also seen it kind of grow to so there's things like the Time's Up movement, though I think in the last year they've had a bit of some rocky things going on, but there's just been all these other movements that have come out that are supporting that continuing to be better, to make the world a safer place for survivors, to maybe get to a day where we don't have survivors of sexual violence. I mean, it would be an amazing thing to have that someday in the future. But it really has been game changing. Clients that are coming in, they are already coming in with less stigma, less shame, because they're seeing these communities that are sharing and showing that you can heal, and that you can, if you want, you can advocate. There's a lot of empowerment going on, and it really is beautiful. And I share that knowing that, we just came from a very challenging presidency where there were a lot of instances of questionable sexual violence in the media from that administration, right? So in a time where that is also in the media, you're then seeing this beautiful, empowering that really started, I'm getting my time frame mixed up, but I think started before, and then seeing it grow. It's been just really an amazing thing to witness.
Yeah, I've seen, it's interesting since the whole Me Too movement started, people that I know that I obviously you're not always thinking that somebody has had an experience, right, being sexually assaulted or, sexual harassment. But even like men that I know, people that I just never would have ever thought of, they've come forward and expressed their own experiences with sexual assault. And I was kind of shocked by it, but it's good that they felt more comfortable to be able to express that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that seeing that movement happening and seeing all these other movements coming, I agree. I think that I've seen more cisgendered men being more open about being a survivor and feeling less stigma and shame and talking about being a survivor. In our services, we've been able to offer a men's group where we haven't had enough men to do that before. And I forgot to mention that of all of the things we do, we also offer a lot of group therapy. We think that group is such a wonderful way to help survivors heal, because they can see, like, I'm not alone. There are other people. I'm no different than these other people. There's nothing wrong with these other people. There's nothing wrong with me. And we've, like I said, we've been able to have a men's group. We haven't in years because we just never had enough men to form to do a men's group.
You're all doing so much work, so you're bound to forget all the services that you offer. Seems like you're all super busy with the work you're doing.
Thank you. We try to be active.
As an advocate for survivors of sexual assault, how do you keep doing this work, which must be so draining at times?
I feel like I'm asked, well, it's one of those things that I feel like I think a lot about, but don't always focus on, if that makes any sense. And to me, it's kind of like, there's no question that I would do this. I just always feel like this is what I would do. And I know that in recent history, this has been a little bit problematic to think this way, but sometimes people will think about how they have like a calling and how, it's not easy for people to do this work in a sustained way. And I think that if you can, then it is a calling and that it is a responsibility to stay doing the work. And I share that that's a little problematic because that implies that there's something like unique or special about, and there isn't. I think anybody can do this work. It just means having to pay attention differently about self-care and how you're managing yourself and your own like wellness. And that's what I mean. I think anybody could, but for me, it's always been something that's been no question that I would do this work. Being where I am now, I feel incredibly grateful and lucky to even be where I am. WOAR is one of the first rape crisis centers that started in the 70s. And it's been around for almost 50 years. And I really see it as not only something just to be a part of something that helps heal the community and then make sure to like be a custodian for the future so that it stays to heal the future. And just there's nothing like it. Like there's sometimes I feel like we're in some kind of like loophole that people don't realize that there's these beautiful services that are free of charge to survivors of sexual violence, and one day they're going to figure this out. And but it's just such a unique thing that you don't really see it anywhere else. I kind of see it as like society's way of trying to correct wrongs and to be a part of that can keep things going in the best way possible for survivors and then survivors of the future. To me, that's part of there's no question as to why I would do it.
You're so right that it is something that affects all aspects of society that people don't really realize. And so I think it's important that people understand that, oh, she's a survivor, it's not going to affect me. But you never know if that person ends up being an employee at your work. And if you're the boss, if that person is taking time off because of traumatic related incidences, or that person's perpetrator is working with you. So I think something to think about.
And if I can share some of the statistics, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men. So it's very, and those are people that have either been survivors of completed or attempted rape experiences between the ages of 11 and 17. So it is very, what you're saying is very likely that if you're in a room of 3 other women or 4 other men, that one person might have that experience. And I think it's important to be aware of it, not to ask them about it, obviously, but just to be aware and maybe adapt how to view how people are doing. I think Brene Brown has the motto of something like, I'm paraphrasing it, but it's something like everybody's doing their best. And if you have that mindset that everybody's doing their best, because you never know what somebody's experience is. And when you know statistics like this, you can only assume.
I was just kind of curious about prevalence of human sex trafficking, if it's more prevalent now than it was in years prior, or if it's actually less prevalent now.
Statistics from that's on the Polaris website, the Polaris Project, and that I mentioned before, that's the organization that runs the National Human Trafficking Hotline. They were able to recently put out their 2020 statistics. And according to their hotline, they had over 10,000 situations of trafficking in that year. The thing about this data around statistics and knowing how data works for sexual violence is it's thought that that's only really the tip of the iceberg of the actual problem, because just like sexual violence, it's very underreported for all the reasons we mentioned before, and there's more reasons why something might be underreported for trafficking. So my hope is that more people are comfortable reporting because there's more awareness and more places to go for that support. But I think it's probably still it's hard to say that it's happening more often. I think it's just being reported more, and there's still much more instances that are not coming to light.
So April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what WOAR is doing?
April is our favorite month at WOAR. It's Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and so it's our opportunity to make sure that sexual violence, sexual assault, abuse, and harassment kind of stay in the forefront of people's awareness for at least that month until the next year. And so in that month we do a lot of awareness activities. We also do a lot of activities to encourage people to donate. A lot of our funding comes through state and federal funds. We always need more funding though, donations and unrestricted dollars. We are unique in that all of the services that I described before are completely free of charge, and we don't need to worry about insurance, and we tend to be a safe place for undocumented people because we don't require social security numbers. We don't require anything like that. We do have a wonderful Latinx coordinator that does some amazing outreach work. And so a lot of our activities for Sam will include things that she'll be doing. She hosts like a radio program weekly for the Latinx community. And we also have a couple of other things coming up. We have Teal Day. Teal is the awareness color for sexual violence. And so we usually do a press conference on Teal Day. And we also have our last event for the year is our biggest kind of like community organizing event, and it's called Hands Around City Hall. And we're getting that up and running, and that will be at the end of April. And Hands Around City Hall is just a wonderful opportunity for survivors that want to share their stories to share their stories and help people realize or put some humanity to the statistics we've mentioned before of the 1 in 4, 1 in 3. So if enough people gather in the room, it becomes a really powerful experience. We've done Hands Around City Hall at City Hall inside, and also inside the like plaza space and the outside of the City Hall. It just depends on, it rains a lot in April. So we're having to often shift our outdoor. And with the pandemic too, last year we did everything virtually. I think we're all in a space now of, is it safe to start doing some things outdoors? Is it not? So we're seeing what that looks like. But those are some of the events that are coming up, and we'll have more events coming out, and all of that information can be found on our website and then also our social media. We are on Instagram and Twitter, and I think we also have like a YouTube. We're like all over.
You're everywhere.
We try to be.
That's great. Those sound like really great events.
Here's the other beautiful thing about a rape crisis center. Again, I mentioned before that like these places are so amazing. To me, the history of rape crisis centers are so amazing. Rape crisis centers, a big component to being one is to have a volunteer element to your work. So we have a lovely volunteer community. To be a volunteer or to work at WOAR, everyone goes through a 40-hour sexual assault counselor training, and you become specifically trained on how to support survivors emotionally, and what the criminal process looks like, what the rape kit process looks like, all the things I mentioned before, so that you can be a present, knowledgeable support for that person that's going through this. And we have really some amazing people that volunteer with us that they give their time to support others that are going through this. And we can always take more volunteers. We do the training 3 times a year, and on our website is a way to connect. So if people can't donate money but are more wanting to donate time, it's something we can explore as well. We can't do our work without our volunteers. They are just, I can't say enough about how in awe I am of these people that do this with us.
Yeah, volunteers are very important. I think that's great. Encouraging people to volunteer and help out as much as possible. It's very important that people it helps with awareness too.
Would they have to be in Philadelphia?
No, they don't. Most of the time they are. easier if you're in Philadelphia to get to PSARC, so you can be present during if someone's requesting a rape kit. We have staff that do that, but we're not a 24-hour staff, so that's where our volunteers come in. So people that are living in Philadelphia, though we do have some volunteers that live outside of in neighboring counties. Neighboring counties also have similar centers. So if someone's interested in volunteering, we might refer them to that. We work really closely with the other centers. We have really wonderful collaborative relationships with them. So we'll probably help get them connected to their county.
Yeah, I think the same goes for people that are even outside the Philadelphia area. I mean, wherever you are, there's probably a place where you can also volunteer and help out as much as you can.
And I think most counties, for the most part, have some sort of sexual assault center or organization. So help is there if you need it. And you may not want to go right away, and that's okay. I mean, sometimes people don't go for decades, but when the time is right, help is there.
Mm-hmm.
And the work that you are doing on behalf of WOAR is really, really important. And, like you said, for you, it's almost like a calling. And I don't know, I don't think anybody can do it, like you had said. I think I would give yourself a little bit more credit.
Well, thank you. But I guess if I was going to say anything else, it would be just really underscoring that the team that we have, they are so resilient, and it's been a hard time for everyone with COVID and all that comes with working virtually, and the way that they have transitioned, and particularly in Philadelphia. If I could maybe just underscore how, I mean, again, I'm just really lucky for the people that we have. They're really just amazing.
And I'm sure the survivors feel the same way too.
I hope so. Probably.
Good, you're not being so humble anymore.
I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us and give us all this information. That'll be very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
If you or someone you know is looking for support and are outside of the Philadelphia area, be sure to look up a local sexual assault support services agency or provider in your local area. You can also call the National Sexual Assault Hotline at 1-800-656-4673. It's a 24/7 hotline, and they will connect you with someone in your area.
We want to thank Greg for sharing his story, and to Rachel for telling us more about the incredible work that WOAR is doing to support survivors of sexual violence in Philadelphia. It's April, and there's a lot going on because it's Sexual Assault Awareness Month. To learn more about WOAR, check out their website, WOAR.org, and also to see what they are up to this month. There are many ways you can help. You can volunteer your time, you can provide pro bono services, and you can also give a small contribution. Anything can help, no matter how small.
Well, that's going to do it for this episode. Be sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, like and subscribe. Look out for the next episode.
And we'll see you next time.